Episode 128 of the podcast. If you think that a dog is being stubborn, willful, or defiant, you are very likely to fall into a trap. A classic trap. A trap that leads you down the road to more of the same behavior or worse behavior. And what is that trap? Find out this week. You're listening to the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Newmeyer-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, a certified behavior consultant for canines, a certified professional dog trainer, and the owner of Happy Critters in Nashua, New Hampshire. And this, my friends and colleagues, is the podcast where grooming and training meet. I want to talk about the dogs that get labeled as stubborn, willful, or defiant. Now, when we think that a dog's behavior is being caused by being stubborn or willful or defiant, we're making some assumptions about the behavior that we're seeing. Now, keep in mind, behavior is something that we observe. We are watching for a behavior. If we think that that dog is stubborn or willful, what we're implying is that the dog understands exactly, precisely what we want in that situation, in that moment, or when that cue is given, and the dog is simply choosing to not do it for us. And that's the first part of the trap. Stubborn, willful, defiant, these things are likely to push you into a trap, a classic trap, a common trap. That's the first part of the trap, is looking at a behavior and thinking that the dog truly understands exactly what is expected in that moment and is choosing to not do it. Now take a moment to observe the behavior before you say, or when you start thinking that perhaps this has to do with being stubborn or willful or defiant. Take a moment to observe the behavior and everything else going on at the same time. So it's not just the behavior that we ask for, it's also all of the other things happening at that moment, at the same time, because sometimes we need to step back and assess the level of difficulty that's going on in that moment, because it may not be as simple and clear cut as you thought it was. Here's a general example, average dog owning example. Asking for a sit in your nice quiet living room with a treat in your hand is not as difficult as asking for a sit while watching horses play on the other side of a fence. I think we can all agree that represents a very different distraction level, a very different difficulty level, perhaps an over-arousal for that dog, or perhaps fear. I think we're better able to understand it when we think, well, yeah, I mean, come on, horses are running around. Now, here's an owner grooming example, when owners are working with their own dogs. You might have a dog who is excellent for touching all over while you're snuggling on the sofa, but that is not as difficult as trying to pick a burr out of a tail. Do we understand where the difficulty level is so different? And I think, again, we are more likely to recognize that that's a different difficulty level. Like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, but now I'm trying to pull a burr out of his tail. Of course he's not going to respond the same way he does when we're on the sofa touching his tail. Now, an average owner might not recognize that difference, but I think most dog pros can. So if we think about difficulty level changes as part of that trap that we need to avoid, right? That if we look and say this dog is being stubborn, willful, or defiant because he's not doing what I think I want this dog to do, this behavior isn't what I wanted, then we really need to look at the behavior and look at the difficulty level. And I'm going to say that here because in the grooming setting, if you are a groomer, I think you're better positioned to know what those difficulty levels are. Like to kind of look around and go, okay, there are other dogs walking around and mom just pulled up and is waving in the window going, oh, he's so cute. You know, I think we all can recognize that that's a difficulty level for a dog. But we might not realize that how long we've been working with a dog makes it a difficulty level. And that's one of the times that I'll hear stubborn. Well, he was good before. He knows how to be good. But now he's being really, really bratty. Bratty's another label. But, now he's fighting with me about this brushing stuff. Yeah, because he has been on your table for 2 hours. Like that alone would be a difficulty level. That's a much more difficult situation than it was an hour ago. For some dogs, for many dogs. But that's why we have to get rid of the idea of stubborn, willful, and defiant and really observe the behavior. Okay? I'm not saying that those things don't exist. I'm just saying that it's not in your best interest to look at the world that way. Because the second part of that trap, here's the second part of the trap of thinking that a dog is being stubborn, willful, or defiant. The second part of that trap is how we respond. How do we respond when we think a dog is being defiant, willful, stubborn, choosing to not do what we want them to do? Just making a choice. He knows better. He knows better and he knows how to do it. And he's just choosing to mess with my life today. Right? How do we respond? And I'm going to say that's when we tend to jump to this dog is being a problem. This dog isn't having a problem. This dog is being a problem. And in the past, I've mentioned dogs aren't giving us a problem. Dogs are having a problem. Now, if we start thinking this dog is just ignoring me, blowing me off, trying to tick me off, right? Then what happens is we respond by trying to punish that away. Now you might think, well, that's not a big deal. All right, I'm going to say it can be a big deal because when we try to punish away a behavior, when we see something we do not like and we just try to put a stop to it, we're not being very instructional and teaching them what we do want. So if we have a dog that we really think should know better, it means that we probably assume, or maybe we know, that this dog can do better in other circumstances. So part of what this dog needs to know is already in there. How fascinating, right? Let's just take a minute and think about that. Oh, wait, if this dog totally lets me handle his tail while we're hanging out on the sofa, then I'm on my way to working toward being able to pull a burr out of his tail. I'm just not there yet, right? That if a dog truly understands how to sit and can sit when things get a little bit more interesting, then maybe they can build up to sitting when there are horses nearby. We have the nugget to work with. We have a little bit of something that we can build on, but we have to be in a behavior building frame of mind to build on it. So I want you to think about that. If instead we look at the behavior and say, okay, this has gotten too difficult for this dog. This dog's having trouble with it. How can I make it easier and build toward the difficulty level that we ultimately need to build toward? And the grooming environment is a very, very distracting, difficult environment for most dogs. They have to learn how to handle that. And then most dogs can handle it. But the average dog, their first grooming experience is overwhelm. And I think that many people who are not groomers don't really understand how many things are happening all at the same time. So if you're trying to teach a dog to be good for something in the grooming process, you need to think about building on difficulty levels. Difficulty levels could be more sound, just more sound going on at the same time. Now you might think that can't happen at home, but I'll tell you what, if I have a dog that's not good for dryers and stuff, I'll find out from the owners what they do when they vacuum. Oh, we put him outside. Oh, he hates that sound, so we never make him endure it. We can build on loud noises instead of being at home and always sheltering him from that bad experience of a loud noise, when the reality is that that dog needs to learn about loud noises in a grooming environment. So there are plenty of times I have owners go home with homework like, I want one person to be working with the dog in the living room while someone else turns on a vacuum cleaner in the bedroom with the door closed. There's a loud noise happening and you're not going to just bomb around the house and escape it. I'm going to work with you over here. And maybe it's just going to be silly stuff, sits, tricks, downs. But we're going to work on something while that noise is happening and build the comfort zone around that noise. But if we just assume that this dog knows how to stand on a table and is being defiant, willful, or stubborn as soon as dryers turn on, we might miss that opportunity to instead build on what they already know. And that's the difference between the reinforcement mindset and the punishment mindset. And we're going to get into that a little bit next. If you're enjoying this podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes, and tell all of your friends. Punishment mindset or reinforcement mindset. I want you to think about how dogs will continue to do things that they find pleasant or useful, and stop doing things that are unpleasant or aren't useful. Things that never ever work are things that you don't tend to do an awful lot of. Things that do work, you do tend to do an awful lot of. If there is a behavior that we want to stay the same or increase, we have to make that behavior somehow pleasant or useful for the dog. and that's the reinforcement mindset. Reinforcement is when a behavior stays the same or increases. Now, that might be increase in duration, that might be an increase in how often it happens, that might be a lot of different ways that a behavior can increase. But it stays the same or increase is reinforcement. Use of punishment would end or decrease a behavior. However, here is the very, very tricky part, my friends. The measure of behavior change is what tells you if it was reinforcement or punishment, not what you planned. It might fall off the rails from what you planned. It's not about how we feel about if that was a reinforcement or a punishment. It's how the dog feels about if that was a reinforcement or a punishment. So let me give you an example. One of my dogs, years ago, when we were learning flyball, she did something. She finally got a box turn, grabbed the ball, turned, did it beautifully, and a friend of ours yelled, "Woohoo!" Now let me ask you, is that reinforcement or punishment? Yeah, I really haven't given you enough information yet, have I? Because it's entirely about what had happened to the dog. How did the dog feel about woohoo? Well, I'll tell you what, my dog, who was kind of a shy little girl, hit the deck. She dropped into a down, dropped the toy, tail tucked, freaked out because that was not enjoyable. And we spent a long time trying to get her, okay, go back over. Look, Claire wasn't yelling at you. Now another dog might be like, yeah, that was great, and do it again, right? So was it a reinforcement or a punishment? In this case, woohoo, was a punishment. This dog didn't want to experience that again. So it lessened or ended the behavior that we were looking for. Now I'm going to give you another example. Here's another example, and I'm flip-flopping them so that you start seeing it's not about our intention, right? The intention of woohoo was to tell her how great she did in a language that another dog would have really enjoyed, but not this one. Here's another example. A dog that keeps jumping up on people and people keep pushing him down and saying, no, knock it off. And the dog keeps jumping up, no, knock it off. What are we using there? Well, we're saying things like no and knock it off, but is it a punishment? No, because in this case, I just said the dog keeps jumping back up and wanting more. For a lot of dogs, that turns into a really fun wrestle. It's a really common thing that we find in dog training is that owners are doing this thinking that I'm telling him no and I'm being stern, but that dog is enjoying that. And that dog is liking the fact that you keep putting your hands up and pushing him down again, right? So therefore, for that dog, no, knock it off and a good shove is reinforcing the behavior. That's reinforcement. The behavior is staying the same or increasing. The target behavior, the thing you wanted to change. So when we think about reinforcement and punishment, it's not so much about, well, if I say these words or I do this action, it's more about how is the dog perceiving it. Now, in the case of this classic trap that we fall into with stubborn and defiant, and, when we start thinking that this dog is simply ignoring us and he's not listening, and we start going, no. Are we still asking for the thing that we wanted? Are we thinking about the difficulty level that dog might be experiencing? So, for instance, the dog who's afraid of the sound of the dryer, if we know that dog can stand still and that dog can let us brush him and that dog can be good for all these other things until the dryer turns on, what if it wasn't on your mind that the dryer turned on? And that was what changed the behavior, that's what made it too difficult. So now you're trying to tell that dog to knock it off. Knock it off. Stop disrespecting me, right? Is the dog disrespecting you? That's where this trap happens, and you're going to keep telling that dog to knock it off and knock it off and knock it off, and it's not going to help teach that dog to do the thing it knows how to do with a higher distraction level. You're in the stop doing, not the please do. Or building. So it's a different mindset. If you think that dog is just being stubborn, you are more likely to respond in ways that make it more difficult. Make it harder. So Back to the example of the dog that is having trouble with sit while watching horses play on the other side of a fence. Do we jump to, "You're just ignoring me? How can you just ignore me?" No, usually we would say, "Wow, yeah, he's never seen a horse in his entire life, and that's a lot going on." So instead of, "Knock it off," "No," which would be kind of pointless, right? We might instead say, "Sit." Like, let me get your focus, try to get your focus, and ask for that sit again. We might walk them further away from the fence in view of the horses and ask for that sit again. Lower the difficulty level. The example of the dog that lets people touch his tail and touch him all over on the sofa, but doesn't understand how to do it well when they're trying to pick out a burr. We might make that a little bit easier by maybe putting him on the sofa to pick out that burr, if that's closer to what he's used to, and build up toward a dog who can just, stand in the driveway and let you pick out a burr. But to be thinking about, this dog is having a difficulty with what we're doing. This dog isn't trying to be defiant. This dog isn't being stubborn. This dog isn't being willful. This dog is having a hard time. And how can I address that? Because if I really think that this dog knows, then I have something to work with. I have something to build on. He knows something. Because we don't usually say willful, stubborn, defiant with dogs who are entirely new to everything. Then we use words like scared, right? Or energetic or distracted. But we don't tend to go with like willful if a dog has never, ever, ever walked indoors before. And think about that. Some of these dogs coming to us from rescues and stuff, some of these dogs have been living outdoors. We know if a dog looks like they have never, ever seen the inside of a building before, or a dog has never, ever, ever experienced grooming before, and they're already like hunched over, even walking into the environment. We don't usually call them willful. We don't usually call them stubborn. We usually call them scared, overwhelmed, easily distracted. So it's a different mindset, but it's a trap. Willful, stubborn, all of those things are going to lead you down a path that lets you think that this is all about the relationship you have with the dog, instead of what the dog knows and what context they can work in. So different mindsets. I want you to think it's not a dog being stubborn, willful, or defiant. That's not usually what I see. And even if it were, you labeling it that way isn't helpful for you to get the job done. For you to get the job done requires you to look at the atmosphere of everything going on all at the same time and build up the experience level of that dog to be able to handle the distraction levels or difficulty levels that they're going to face. That's in your best interest. That's the fast track. You can say no all day and think that you're being stern, but if it's not helping, it's just saying no for the sake of feeling better about yourself that you're not putting up with baloney. But if it's not helping, then you need to reevaluate. This is the fast track. Teach them to be good for the situations that they're going to need to be good for. And it's a different mindset. So I want you to think about every time that you have said stubborn or willful or defiant, or the dogs in particular that you might think that way about, and instead take a moment, step back and observe behavior, and then decide, actually, do they know anything about the situation that we're putting them in? Because maybe they don't. Maybe they have no idea, and they've just been in panic mode every time we put a dryer near their head. That they have no idea what's going on. They just know if they turn into a shark, people yell and back off. I don't care if you yell, as long as I feel safe again. We need to look at the whole thing so that we can create a great grooming dog. If you'd like more information, you can find me at Chrissy@happycritters.net, happycrittersdogtraining.com, or you can join the Facebook group, Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast, or the Facebook page, Creating Great Grooming Dogs. I really look forward to hearing from you.